Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode. This week, I'm joined by my friend Kamara.
Hi, happy to be here.
Yeah, Joseph's not here this week because he's both moving and then he went to a wedding. So, this is the first Girls and Gays episode of Silent Generation, and we're going to be talking about antiques. So, when I first met Kamara, it was at a dive bar in Chicago called Rainbow Club, and I met her, and she had like a really beautiful outfit with a vintage coat and antique gloves. And it made this impression where I associate you with the aesthetic that Joseph and I really like, or more so me. I lean a bit more like early 20th century, but you kind of fit the part more than I do. I don't dress like that.
I think that it's harder to bring in vintage elements in men's wardrobes without it feeling costume-ish.
Yeah, people don't realize this, but formal menswear was really good for being outside or being in rooms that weren't climate controlled.
I'm sure.
Because people used to live in homes that were like a lot chillier. And when you stepped outside, you needed a hat to protect yourself from the elements. And people don't wear hats now because we go from climate controlled space to climate controlled car. And then
Right.
we are only outside for like a brief period of time. So yeah, so to start out, I think definitions can be a bit boring, but this is a good term to define. So what makes an object an antique and what makes an object retro or vintage? So the general definition now in the 21st century is that an antique is anything that's more than 100 years old. And then vintage refers to anything 50 years old. And then retro refers to anything that imitates an older style, regardless of when it was produced. So when the word antique first came into use, it referred only to handcrafted objects made before 1830, prior to mass production. So the word antique originally had a definition that was closer to, say, that of manuscript. Are you familiar with manuscripts?
Yeah, of course.
I actually didn't know what they really were until I did library school. I don't know if that was like a big blind spot for me. Manuscripts have to be written by hand. That's how it works. But so, yeah, I feel like antiques originally had a definition that was closer to that. And then something came out called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930. And that's where the definition that an antique is a work of art created prior to 1830 comes from. But yeah, now it's anything more than 100 years old. So I think now it'd be interesting to get into how we got into antiques. And so would you actually want to go first since you're the guest?
Yeah, sure. I grew up really poor, so my family always mainly shopped at thrift stores. So I think that very early on, I imprinted on like used objects as sort of, existing in this kind of treasure trove sort of space. And I just love how hodgepodge a lot of antique stores and thrift stores especially tend to be in their organization. There's a real like dragon's hoard sort of quality to them that's very enchanting to me. I also watched a lot of Antiques Roadshow growing up, so there also being that impression of like these kind of hidden gems that people are bringing in. I've always loved history, and that's such a broad thing to say, but like everyday items and everyday habits, from different eras.
It seems too, though, like you just have an overarching aesthetic towards like older things. Like I visited your apartment, you had like a housewarming party, and you live in this like really beautiful apartment building that pretty much everything is original. I mean, lobby, staircase, like even your kitchen and bathroom, everything. It's like, I don't think there's anything really in your apartment that like seems like it's been recently renovated.
No, other than like the landlord paint job where they covered all the, all the trim. But
yeah, I mean, I live in a somewhat similar apartment. I've lived in the same building for almost 8 years now, and it was built in the 1890s. And mine, unlike yours, it has wood trim that hasn't been painted.
Yeah.
So,
well, I was going to ask, I know that you've painted the walls. Did you have to do any like refinishing of any of the wood in here, or is this just how it came?
The building is owned by this woman who bought it in the 80s, and she has two sons. And one of the sons redid all the wood in the apartment. Presumably, it had to be done by hand because the wood trims are not like super flat. I mean,
sure.
It doesn't seem like the type of thing that you can easily put a sander on. So it was a lot of work for him to do it. I did paint some of the walls. The room we're in right now, it has a color on it called watermelon. I had a previous roommate who liked it. And yeah, my landlord is really chill. I mean, upon moving in, she said that we could throw parties as much as we wanted. And
Love
I haven't
that.
had a lease in like 5 years. There was no deposit. I like whenever I get a new roommate, I just get one and they don't say anything. It's very informal. But yeah, I like older buildings too. When I walk around, usually I look around for buildings with original features. That's what I pay attention to.
Same.
But yeah, for me, my interest in antiques, it actually was this really like, it comes from this very fervent period of my life in the pandemic. I oftentimes go through like sort of phases where I become really obsessed with a topic and research it for several hours a day. Now, ever since this podcast started, I only have a week to research things, but some of the episodes are on some of those things that I became really passionate about. But antiques, ancient Roman ruins, exotic fruit, those are some of the things that I've gotten really obsessed with. And so during the period of the pandemic where I got really into antiques, I was in this house more than I usually was. And I started to just pay attention to the objects that I had. And when I first moved in 8 years ago, I got like all of my family's antiques pretty much. They all became mine. They're all under my stewardship now. And so I wanted to make sure that they're all in good condition. So I started to do things like wax them. And then I realized that some of them were missing their finish. And I had an ex-boyfriend redo like 2 of my tables. And then I actually got a sideboard restored. I'll get to that later. But
Sure.
yeah, I just got really into all the things I own. But I don't even feel like the work is done. I mean, upon writing this out, I realized that there are some lamps like that one in the corner. That one is missing a bulb.
Oh, okay.
I don't know the size. So yeah, there's just like a few things that I could still do. But I try to be a good steward of the things that I've inherited, because a lot of them actually come from my great grandmother who lived in California, along with my great grandfather. But my grandmother had brought the antiques over when I was born, because she came to Chicago to help me for like a year after when I was a baby. But then she stayed for 14. And then when she left, she was like, I don't want it. And then my dad, when he downsized, he was like, I don't want this either.
Sure.
And so now that's where all this stuff comes from.
You said that you didn't have an appreciation for antiques before the pandemic, and it really developed then. Did you feel like an affinity for these objects that you inherited just as like family heirlooms or anything before the pandemic, or was it just convenient to have this furniture and then you came to appreciate like the beauty and the age of it later?
Well, I've gone through several aesthetic cycles, and one of them was C-punk in high school, and I went through a bunch of them. But when I was in college, my aesthetic taste leaned towards like brand new metallic LED lights. Like if you look at my Instagram and you scroll back past say 2018, you can see it becomes really blue, and there's a bunch of pictures of ceilings, and I really liked like brand new skyscrapers.
Okay.
And then somewhere along the line, it sort of switched, and then I became interested in early 20th century skyscrapers, and I became interested in this period. And yeah, that happened around then. But another thing too is like I needed to have glasses so long before I actually got them. I just feel like that for a lot of my life, I like was just like not fully taking in my surroundings, and now I do.
So you couldn't appreciate the fine details on some of these older buildings and such.
Yeah, because I guess, a lot of these antiques, I grew up with them, so they look very ubiquitous. There's this phenomenon that happens where something, when you see it too much and you appreciate its beauty too much, you can't really appreciate it, like say with roses. But then, after say a decade of taking them for granted, out of the blue, you just start to appreciate them again. And that's sort of what it happened with all the objects that I own.
Like a marriage or something. It's like the pendulum's just swinging back.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you too. So you grew up in rural Illinois, right? Because I associate the antiques and the antiques industry a lot with rural areas. Like the TV show American Pickers, they'd go from like countryside barn to countryside barn, and there'd be like just properties filled out onto the lawns with like rusty things that they would then like go and buy.
Right.
And like, I think there's like more of like a sense of legacy in rural areas, people who practice farming, they've been doing it in their family for a long time and they just might appreciate the past in a different way.
Yeah, I think there's something to that, or at least there's like a yearning for that sort of connection. I think a lot of farmland was consolidated in the 90s following the farm crisis in the 80s, where a lot of these smaller family farm operations collapsed. So,
What was the farm crisis in the 80s?
I, so I'm gonna sound real dumb right now, but I'm uninformed, but I'm pretty sure that it was like commodity prices on grain really tanked at the same time that property taxes and some other, back end financial stuff, those costs were rising. So there were several years of like just repeated pressure on farm insurance, I believe, and like banks that specifically catered to farmers. So a lot of smaller farms, family farms went bust. And then since there was all of this farmland being sold at a low price, the wealthiest families in the area or, outside investors that are several steps removed from a farm ended up buying a lot of farmland. And that's resulted in this more like, it's made the patches and kind of the quilt of American farmland like much larger plots. So,
yeah.
I
mean, we talk about, I'm sick of saying this word, honestly, but we talk about monopolization all the time and just how scale in business and across America keeps going up. And that's just another example. But on farmers' banks, have you ever seen Louis Sullivan's jewel box banks?
No, I haven't heard of that.
Yeah, he's my favorite architect. And he, later in his career, he did a series of banks that were all in square. They're all square to a degree. That's why they're called jewel boxes, because on the inside, they're really ornate. But yeah, a lot of those were farmers' banks. And they're still around.
Okay.
They're very pretty.
Yeah, what was the name of the architect again?
Louis Sullivan.
Sullivan? Okay. But yeah, that's a bit of a digression, but I think that there's like a feeling of disjointedness from family land and familial history in a lot of these areas. So I think that that's an element in like the collecting of these, pieces of scrap metal and like some things that do end up being worth some value to antiques collectors. I think a lot of it is sort of like a clinging to a past sort of feeling or a romanticization of that and wanting to hold on to these relics of bygone eras.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate them for doing it. I appreciate anyone for doing it. But we'll get into stewardship again right at the end of the episode. But next, I think it'll be interesting to just talk about like what antiques that we own. So I've talked a little bit about some of the antiques that I have, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the antiques that I own, and I'm going to start out with lamps. So I own a lot of antique lamps, the majority of which are ones that I inherited, and I've had to do like different things to sort of fix them up. Like I've gotten 2 of them rewired from a local Chicago company in Avondale called A Lamp and Fixture Core. I really recommend them because rewiring lamps is pretty cheap. I've gotten it done for as low as like $30. And I've also had to get shades. And other than that, I have not had to do too much to them. And I've turned into one of those people where like I never turn on overhead lights. Have you seen any of those like memes or TikToks recently about like, the difference of like a room having the overhead lights on versus lamps?
I haven't seen those memes, but I do think anybody who turns on the overhead lights are psychotic. It just makes me feel so judged and like under a microscope. Yeah. I need the soft lighting.
Yeah, I mean, I host Thanksgiving at my house like every year for my family. And one year I had like my roommate also joined in, and my my sister was like, "It's so dark in here. Like, why aren't none of the lights on?" And then I turned on one of the overhead lights, and my roommate was like, "That turns on." I didn't realize that it was even possible because like I'd literally never turned it on since he moved in.
Did you ever hear as a kid, like reading in low light will damage your eyes? We're both wearing eyeglasses, so maybe it's true. But
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
my mom would tell me that like I shouldn't even watch TV without any lights on. Like there needed to be a lamp on at least. Yeah. So I've also had to get like some lampshades. There's one right next to you that's like really pretty. Also, I'm going to put up a Pinterest board and I'm going to try to take pictures of some of these antiques that I talk about just so that people have some frame of reference. And we're also going to add images of antiques that I don't own, just of some like antique styles that we're going to get to in another section. But yeah, the one right next to you is what's called capiz shell. It's a translucent shell that comes from window pane oysters. They're farmed in the Philippines and turned into things like lampshades and bowls. It's pretty delicate. And yeah, I always find that like imitation glass is really pretty. Like, have you ever heard about how medieval windows, they would use like really thin slices of deer bone because they hadn't reinvented glass yet?
No, I haven't heard that. That's so cool. I've heard of like oiled parchment, but that's obviously like a very down market substitute. So
Yeah. But yeah, I love things that like have that look because glass now is very ubiquitous, and anything that has like a relationship to its material origin in the 21st century is like really interesting. Like the fact that there are people farming shells from beaches in the Philippines. Like there just are very few like objects traded on the world market today that like aren't produced through like petrol oil in some way. So,
right. Yeah.
yeah. And then for some of my other lampshades that I wanted to try to figure out, like what would be the best lampshade that would fit this lamp, I actually used a tool called Just Answers Antiques. So this is my first like antiquing tip on today's episode. So there is a service, Just Answers, and you can ask experts questions for like $1 for 1 week. And then past that, they bump it up to like 30. And you just want to cancel your account after you have all your questions asked. And so I do recommend this for anyone who has antiques where they want to get them appraised because that's the main thing that they do. But you can also ask them questions about like the age, style, and provenance of your antiques. And I used it for that lampshade question. So like, for example, in my room, I have like a 5 feet tall floor lamp. It's in mission style. It's hard dark wood. And I wanted to figure out like what would have made sense for it. Mission style, they oftentimes use lampshades that are like derived from animal skin, but I found one that honestly didn't even match. So I'm not even using the service like I said. Or I mean, it's not like super, super authentic, but it's like a stained glass lampshade that's in like a mission style. And it's perfect. Honestly, if I sold that lamp on Cherish, I could easily fetch like 1,000 for it, if not like 2 or 3. For people who are trying to upsell their antiques, Cherish is like the best place to go. It's like highly curated.
I was gonna ask. I hadn't heard of that before. Is it through dealers or is it just private people selling and these objects are like getting appraised or something? I guess my question is, how are they, keeping that like quality standard high?
There are people at the company who only like accept certain. They only accept certain postings, but there's like a fair amount. Like if you look up capiz shell, for example, on Cherish's website, they have like a couple dozen different things you can buy, and it's a pretty extensive place. I have one thing I bought from there. It's my coat rack in the corner.
Beautiful coat rack.
Yeah, it's from like a farm in Arkansas in the 1940s, and I didn't pay too much for it. But on Cherish, you can drop thousands like nothing if you have the money for it. Yeah,
I'm sure. Maybe it's a good thing that I have not heard about that site before now. So.
Yeah. But speaking of dropping too much money on antiques, so I have like a sideboard for my great grandmother, and that's the only thing I've gotten like professionally restored. I had it restored by someone in Chicago. He goes by Talman Chicago, and I do recommend him. He's really good at what he does, and I mean, this is how like obsessed I get with things. Like I was just like literally, and I wouldn't use the word manic. I'm not manic, but I was just like so erratic. like I was like barely even working, but I spent like so much money getting this like sideboard professionally restored. And for people who don't know what a sideboard is, they're also referred to as buffets, but they're originally used to store silverware and to store food. So they have wheels. You can like wheel them from the kitchen into the dining room. And then there are 2 little drawers you can pull out. That's what have the silverware. And then below that, there would be the like dishes. And so it's sort of like if you go to like a modern dinner party, oftentimes you go into the kitchen and you grab a plate and then you plate it. You would, instead of going to the kitchen, you just use that. It actually kind of makes more sense, but people don't do dinner parties as much. And now people prefer to spend time in the kitchen. So we live in a different culture, but they're still pretty useful. I use it as like a junk drawer, basically.
Oh, fun. Just the whole sideboard as the one big junk drawer.
Essentially. Yeah. I'm the type of person too where I buy people like gifts like months or even like years in advance for occasions. And
that's so thoughtful.
no, gifting is like my love language. So I have a lot of things that I store in there because no one when they're over, they look in there and it's a good spot.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final thing I want to talk about is just my dining room table. So I have a dining room table and 6 chairs that were my great grandmother's. And I had the guy who repaired my sideboard refer to it as a Cadillac set. Because it's very rare for people to have both matching chairs and a matching table from like that are 100 years old. Mm-hmm. Honestly, it's in like the worst shape it could almost be in. It looks like ancient. I mean, I'll put a picture of it on the Pinterest board, but like it needs to be refinished like yesterday. Like it's it's like literally falling apart, but I got it quoted. It would have been like $6,000. Mm-hmm. So I decided not to.
That is a Cadillac of a table and chairs.
Yeah. But yeah, what made me like not want to restore it too is also just the fact that my parents had reupholstered the chairs and they removed part of the original frame as part of that. And it just makes me not appreciate it as much. Like I'm not as willing to spend that much now.
What do you mean?
So reupholstery is when they add new fabric to the surface of like a upholstered area. And then the upholstery, the chair originally it had like wood around all 4 corners of the chair. Mm-hmm. Now the way they redid it, they actually put like cardboard on the bottom. They ripped off the original top. And so there's just like parts of the chair that they'd removed to reupholster it. It became like a lot thicker. Like originally the cushion was like small. Mm-hmm. And now if you look at the chairs, it's like almost like 6 inches thick or something like that.
So you're saying that already took down the value enough of the chairs that you're not interested in pouring more money into it to restore everything.
Because I feel like there's other dining room sets out there, and millennials are not trying to buy 100-year-old dining room sets. They like usually don't have dining rooms, and I'm lucky to live in like a 150-year-old building, and I have like a really big dining room, but other people don't. So I feel like I should seek out a set that hasn't been modified and hasn't been altered and is in better shape, and I should get that eventually. But I'll keep this one until at least I move out. I will feel really guilty about throwing it away. I probably won't be able to do it, but I also don't want to spend $6,000 to fix it.
So you prefer antiques that are in pristine condition or as close to that as they can get?
Not as much. I guess like when I say it's falling apart, I mean it's literally falling apart. Like they'd used glue blocks for part of the table. That's when basically in order to create more shape or volume in the design, they'll like glue elements on. And they usually stay on, but then after 100 years, they can fall off. So those are falling off. And then the finish of the table, which is like the wood stain. If you want to know if something has a good finish, put your finger up to it and you'll see a reflection of your finger on the wood. If you don't see a reflection, that means that the finish is fading. And depending on like how bad it is, you may need to fully refinish it. But generally you want to avoid that. Just like wax it. You can use something called restore finish, which I'll talk about later. But refinishing is like a last resort because it can reduce the value of the antique. And then also it's a very toxic process. I mean, they try to make it safe, but like it gives people headaches. It probably causes cancer, even if they say it doesn't. So yeah.
That's fair. I guess I just asked because I really like the lived in kind of shabby looking antiques.
Yeah.
So, but that's also maybe an affectation that's cope because I don't have money to, be spending on pristine antiques.
Yeah. But no, now I want to know about your antiques. And you said that your collection is mostly clothing, right?
Yes. Though I do want to highlight like my silverware set, which I'm very proud of. I don't think that I'd ever eaten using like actual silver-plated silverware before this, at least not that I was aware of. But I bought like a set from, I think it's 1921, 1923 or something off of eBay. And it's like this, it has this very cute pinhole, floral and vine pattern throughout all the silverware. So it kind of looks like the pinpricks that you would use to decorate the top of a pie or something, which is just very cute. It's starting to tarnish, actually, so I need to figure out how to polish it. I know that salt is involved in some way, I think, but...
Yeah. That's so Lindy, you're going to polish your silver. Yeah.
Well, it really, like, demands it, yeah, which I wasn't...
All metals oxidize except for 4 elements, so...
And what are those 4 elements?
Like the random ones.
Okay.
Yeah.
And silver is not one of them.
It's not one of them.
So, yeah.
But yeah, it's good that you saved that silverware set, because oftentimes with pure silver, particularly silverware, gets melted down because the metal itself has more value than the antique often does, which is sad. But silverware is actually antibacterial in nature. So it's like very clean to eat with, but it requires extra work of polishing it.
It has a real glow to it that you don't really get with steel or, you know, aluminum, whatever materials.
Shinier.
Yeah. And it's coming from within in this way that you get with pure metals you don't otherwise. So it's really beautiful stuff. Like it's worth preserving. But other than that, I have a book of fairy tales that I grew up with. It's 1934 copy of the Blue Fairy book, so not quite an antique yet. Soon to be.
Very soon.
Oh, I don't want to be 34 yet, or I guess I'd be 36.
I would round up. I would say things from the 1930s are considered antiques now.
And that was a hard decade, so they've lived a lot. But yeah, it's not in great condition, but it's a beautiful book. It has some really great illustrations, and the cover art itself is just really something that sticks with you. So that's a real prize object of mine. I have a few other antique editions of books. Like I have a little book of Saints' Lives, I think is from the late 1800s. So other than that, it is mostly clothing. So I believe that I've touched on some of this earlier as regarding like outerwear. But I'm also a very big fan of vintage shoes, which this is something harder to find because they go through so much wear and tear.
Yeah.
And especially the types that I like tend to be leather soled. So those are especially don't hold up as well.
Especially in today's world where like vintage and antique clothing is so valued.
Definitely. I do think a lot of people have a bit of a hang up when it comes to shoes with buying used. So that works in my benefit. But yeah, I just find that vintage clothing and shoes are much better constructed than a lot of modern garments. The fabric tends to be heavier, and there's a little bit of a survivorship bias here because those are the items that are still around for us to use.
The same thing goes too for old homes. I mean, people say that like all old homes used to be constructed well. That's not true, because a lot of the structures, say in Chicago, that are older, they are like the brick ones. The ones that were wooden have all rotted and mostly been torn down by now. And like when we were going through urban renewal as like a city, when they would do urban renewal, it wasn't the case that every building on every block was torn down. Oftentimes they'd leave behind a few here and there, the higher quality ones. And I feel like one of the only examples of like a neighborhood where like everything was left behind and you can see like what like lower quality buildings from 100 years ago looked like is Bridgeport. Have you walked around there much?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so
I haven't been down there
Bridgeport
at all.
is where the Daleys are from. Two Chicago mayors consecutively, Richard J. Daley, Richard M. Daley. They're both father and son, and they ruled Chicago for like, I don't know, 50 years. And they were machine politicians. And the Bridgeport neighborhood was their like biggest voting block, and they would let them have whatever they wanted pretty much. So there was actually a highway that if it had just continued straight south, it would have gone straight through the neighborhood. It got rerouted around them. And it remained this like working class ethnic white neighborhood, and it was left alone, and it didn't experience urban renewal, whereas like the neighborhoods around it, which were primarily black, they got really urban renewed. I mean, the near south side is probably like the most hollowed out area in the city compared to like how built up it used to be. But yeah, I feel like walking around Bridgeport every single time I walk through it. I mean, I like that it has the walkable, pre-war qualities that it has as a neighborhood, but the houses look whack. Like they are like, they're just like so shoddy and random. I mean, there's some pretty ones, but it's also just not the prettiest neighborhood.
Are a lot of them occupied, or are these abandoned homes that have fallen into disrepair?
I would suspect very few of them are vacant.
Okay.
It's like still like a very lively neighborhood. There are cops that live there, and that's where the Nouveau theater was built. We've talked about that a few times on the neighborhood. Or sorry, we've talked about that a few times on the podcast.
And that's also in Bridgeport?
That's also in Bridgeport.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, you're close.
Yeah.
So it seems like the book, you got that from your family.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the other things, it seems like you're going out and buying. Do you have any like clothing you've inherited, you'd say?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, the book I do definitely consider an heirloom. I have some shirts from my mom that I've kept and are kind of in storage, but I don't really wear them. When I was a teenager, I used to wear more of my mom's clothing. I had a chore coat of hers for a long time that I really used as a staple, but I think I've sold that at this point. So yeah.
Well, I really love your wardrobe.
Thank you.
Yeah. I've never seen a bad outfit.
That's such high praise. One perk of buying vintage and used clothing generally is that I feel so much less guilt rotating my closet pretty often and cycling things in and out. So I have a pretty different wardrobe every couple of years, I would say. But I'm not really, if I'm throwing anything out, it's really at the end of its life cycle after, a lot of repairs and patches and everything.
How would you describe your current aesthetic?
So I'd say my personal style, focusing kind of on this idea of used clothing and past eras and such, tends to be pretty 70s and 90s influenced, I would say.
Yeah.
I like big collars. I'm a big fan of just large, voluminous silhouettes in general.
Yeah.
And rigid fabrics. So that's one thing that I really love about vintage clothing that I feel is harder to find at a lower price point or at a reasonable price point.
Now. Everything's stretchy now.
It is. Stretchy or see-through or both. And I want opaque, rigid fabric that makes a shape around me that is not just my shape. So you really have to go vintage for that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel that way with men's shorts. Every summer, I mean, I didn't even try this summer because it's so much work, but trying to find shorts that aren't two sizes at once or small, medium, large. But I actually am I want to get men's shorts 31, 5 to 7 inch inseam. I can't find them ever. It's everything is just stretchy now and drawstring in some way.
It makes me feel like a baby. Why does it need to be so easy for me to change in and out of clothes? I want a process to getting dressed.
Yeah.
I want a lot of buttons, you know. I need to feel secure. Like I feel like clothing has lost its sort of exoskeleton quality. I really love clothing history in general. And an idea you'll come across a lot is like everyone's just basically wearing underwear now. So
Yeah.
we got rid of all of the exterior layers.
I mean, I believe it. I've gotten so disillusioned with t-shirts since starting this podcast. I just like, I mean, I still have a lot, but I'm so sick of wearing them. It can never meet the same like level of like a dress shirt. And I just want to stop wearing them altogether eventually.
The same level of the dress shirt and like how that's projecting to other people, or just
in
for
terms of
how
durability,
it feels?
in terms of like functionality, in terms of beauty too. I mean, I just think guys look better with more clothing on.
They
like
do.
The least attractive they can be is like a tank top and shirts, or worse, just like a gay guy in a Speedo at a beach. That's like the least attractive thing. So yeah, we can pivot from your personal style into some different styles of antiques. And so these styles, they apply to antiques, but also things like architecture and art. But we're going to try to keep our analysis within the antiques camp. And we're going to be doing these somewhat in chronological order. We're going to go from Victorian to arts and crafts, to Art Nouveau, to Art Deco, to mid-century modern. And so the first one, the Victorian style, it emerged during the reign of Queen Victoria, who reigned from 1837 to 1901. Victorian furniture is typically dark, heavy, and intricately carved, with a focus on opulence that reflects the era's fascination with ornamentation and craftsmanship. So I mean, honestly, I don't actually really like Victorian furniture very much. I think that there's something very ubiquitous about it and about the whole aesthetic in its entirety, because if you picture an old home in your head, I know for me, I picture a Victorian mansion. What would you say you actually picture?
Yeah, I think an Italianate mansion is what I'm thinking of. But that might also be because I'm on a bit of this brings up thoughts of hauntedness for me. Victorian antiques, the like dark heavy wood, all of that just feels very monsters coded to me.
Yeah, I mean, when I was writing this out, I was thinking a little bit about the horror film Monster House. Did you ever see that?
No.
It's about like a house that comes alive and then tries to eat some kids.
Oh, is it like bad CGI?
Yeah.
Yes, I have seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, mid to 2000s kids will know. And yeah, I just feel like when you just think about like something that's an old antique that rich people own, it's not really visually that distinct, especially compared to the other styles we're about to cover. But there is a look to it, you know. It has like a certain opulence to it that I think doesn't come across in other styles.
I do think a little bit of that opulence is kind of in reaction, again, that sort of pendulum idea to the era right before that. I feel like that was a very Georgian furniture tends to be more stripped down. Or maybe not Georgian, but Shaker furniture and like that kind of rough-hewn look to things.
Yeah, I mean, Victorian furniture was happening right around, well, I mean, the Industrial Revolution was picking up, because to get back to the original definition of antiques, you know, they were made before 1830, or at least that's how the Tariffs Act defined it. And so that was when the Industrial Revolution was happening, and it allowed things to become more intricate, more opulent. It wasn't that they were being made in factories. There was still a handmade quality to these antiques, but there were tools available that like they didn't have before. And so things were able to become more intricate. But yeah, I actually got to visit, I think it was the only Victorian home still standing in St. Louis. I went to St. Louis like maybe 2-3 weeks ago, and I was in downtown and I visited the central branch of their public library, and they had this map laid out in one of their archives. It was an aerial view of St. Louis, and it was really, really beautiful. But there was this Post-it note on the map, and it said Campbell House. And I asked one of the librarians, I was like, what is the Campbell House? And they were like, oh, it's like the only Victorian home still standing. And I was like, wait, so you're telling me that everything else in this like hand-drawn aerial view of St. Louis's downtown has been demolished? And they were like, yeah. But yeah,
Do you know why?
a lot of Victorian homes didn't have plumbing.
Uh,
I mean, when urban renewal happened there and in every city across the country, homes like from the Victorian era were targeted. I mean, unless they had plumbing that was eventually built inside of them, like they just wanted them torn down. But honestly, the Campbell house did not look that nice from the outside, at least. It didn't look that visually distinct. Again, there is something about like Victorian style buildings and also antiques where it just looks kind of mad to me. It just doesn't stand out.
mm-hmm. That's interesting. I really do love Victorian architecture. All of the filigree and everything always feels very dollhouse like to me. And it's just so kind of frivolous and unnecessary. It's fun to see people just going all out on, putting as much design on, as much decoration on things as they can possibly fit into it, even if it's a bit like the result is a bit gaudy or.
Yeah, I think the one I saw in St. Louis was not a great example. But yeah, there are actually amazing Victorian homes out there. The furniture, it just like does not do it for me.
That's fair.
Yeah. And it's good you're a guest because again, you're bringing in like the clothing element, things like books too. When I think about antiques, I think about furniture first, which actually a lot of antiques dealers I was learning through doing research for this week, they are like not selling furniture as much now because there just isn't as much demand. People have smaller homes. People who are going out and buying dining room sets are like fewer and fewer. And so, yeah, I think about antiques in terms of furniture more than other people my age, I think.
It was really difficult for me when I was looking for dining room set for my own place, just getting something that fit the dimensions of it and was also vintage and fit the look of it. I ended up going with like a Formica table that's from, I would probably guess the mid 60s.
Yeah.
But yeah, the space is definitely smaller. Do you know what antique stillers are pivoting towards if they're not selling as much furniture these days?
I heard that like something that's really in demand is like catalogs. People are really interested in that.
Okay.
They like collectibles, toys from different eras.
Sure.
Things like that.
Yeah, kind of more niche things, I guess.
Yeah. And your dining room table, did you get chairs for it yet?
Yeah. So I got it as a set. So
cool.
It also came with these. I bought it partially because the chairs are so cool. They have this sort of layered, like lime green and white and orange flower pattern to them. And yeah, it's a matching set with, I think that I have 5 chairs. So yeah.
Yeah. I love Formica myself. My kitchen set is actually a kitchenette set that is made out of Formica. It's from a company called American Chairs. They're a company that creates like 1950s Formica kitchenette sets with union labor. And so it's retro. It's an imitation of an older style that's like made in today's world. And I really recommend them to anyone because they can do custom things too. Like I got to pick out the colors and I'm really happy with it.
What do you think about like kind of retro aesthetics generally? Because I'm personally of two minds. I'm really glad that recreation businesses like that, or I'm thinking of American Duchess for shoes. I'm glad that those exist, but the word retro in my mind brings up like rockabilly, sort of like cheap polyester polka dot dresses to mind. Yeah.
I mean, I think that people don't pay attention to the material world as much as they used to. Like I read a book by Sinclair Lewis, Main Street. It was written 100 years ago. And the amount of like thick description he would give about the characters and the rooms that they were in. And, he could talk about drapes and tables in this way that like is almost foreign to people in today's world. But before technology, you could appreciate materials in a way that like you just don't have an incentive to now. And I think that the eye of older designers and the amount of detail that they put into their designs, it's worth replicating because I don't think people today are like I don't think they have the same sort of like material awareness that people back then had. That's a hot take. Okay.
Definitely something to that, though. It's with the prices of materials rising as well, it's very easy to just kind of opt out. And, there are so many cheap alternatives. So some people really do not care all that much what their spaces look like. A lot of people don't. So,
yeah,
easier options are available.
Yeah. And then the next style we're going to talk about is the arts and crafts movement / mission style. So the arts and crafts movement, which began in the late 19th century, emphasized simplicity, handcrafted quality, and a return to traditional craftsmanship. In contrast to the industrialized production at the time, it celebrated the use of natural materials, and the mission style is a subset of the movement. And it was really popular in the 20th century. And that's marked by functional, sturdy furniture with clean lines. It's honestly not that different. But the two of these are actually my favorite antique style. Again, I have like a floor lamp that is in arts and crafts style. And I like it in part because I have a really strong preference for dark stained wood. Like anything that's like medium or like light brown, I like really don't like that look. Like medium browns in furniture just make me kind of sicked out. I like them to be really, really dark. And the arts and crafts movement, it's closely associated with the designer William Morris, who's one of my favorite historical figures from the design world. He was actually a socialist activist, and he thought that people of all classes deserved to be surrounded by beautiful objects. And he saw the arts and crafts movement as being for the people and by the people. That's a quote from him. But yeah, are you familiar with mission style / arts and crafts at all?
Yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that Frank Lloyd Wright's style of architecture and prairie style in general was another offshoot of this.
Yeah, they look pretty related. I would say that mission style uses less color. Yeah. You can
Which fits the setting.
You can buy like brand new mission style furniture made by Amish people. That's really high quality. I've never bought it, but I've seen it online. That's like a good place that you could buy like, it would sound so wrong to call it retro though. But it feels right to call things retro if they're like from the 1950s, but like to call furniture from like the early 20th century retro, it sounds wrong, but you can buy retro furniture from Amish people. That's arts and crafts style.
Good to know. Yeah. Yeah, the clean lines are really nice in it. Again, glad they're keeping that alive, but I love anything that's like, it's really unfortunate that craftsmanship feels so vestigial at this point in time. Like that's really, it should be more profitable or more valued, I guess, to be able to like make a beautiful chair or a beautiful pair of boots or something. But
I mean, for me as like a young kid growing up and going to Chicago public schools, it was so foreign to me, the idea that you'd have like wood shop or metal shop classes. Like,
really,
I don't think we didn't have those. I think my schools probably didn't have those things due to like resources maybe, but like there are probably high schools out there where there's still high schoolers like making things out of wood and metal. And that's just like wild to me. Like, I don't think our society really values that anymore.
I mean, I did have like a required semester in 8th grade before, we started choosing electives the next year, where it was required that you either took, I think, either shop class or the alternative was something FFA ag related.
Future Farmers of America.
Yes, they're actually just FFA now. They are no longer an acronym, but sick jackets, by the way. Yeah, beautiful jackets. But yeah, so it's definitely out there. I mean, this is something that I think there's still a major focus in trades as a career path in rural areas, but there's a difference between trades and craftsmanship, I think. While there's still personal pride in a welder's work or something, I think the social standing of it is very different.
Yeah, I don't think we value like craftsmanship as much.
Yes, yeah. And there's there are fewer avenues to access that work too, I think. And I don't even know if it's because there's less demand for, fine furniture or what have you these days, or if it's just that that's not a path that's really considered and therefore people aren't encouraged to go into it. But yeah, though, I mean, I guess this is just a further evolution out of our industrial age, as like there's the people that would have been craftsmen at one point are now operating machines. So
yeah, it's true. And the next style we're going to talk about is Art Nouveau. So I really don't think of this as being like an American style. It was much more prominent in Europe. But if you're on Instagram, I feel like most people eventually see some like really pretty shops from like France or other countries, and they're familiar with this style. So it emerged in the late 19th and 20th centuries, and it's characterized by its emphasis on flowing organic forms and intricate details. This style is known for its use of sinuous lines and floral and faunal motifs. And Art Nouveau sought to break away from historical styles and create a new unified aesthetic that integrated craftsmanship with modernity. And so the emphasis here is really on like the flowing, sinuous, organic forms. Like they don't look like flowers per se, although they might incorporate flowers in some of the antiques that they created. But it does have this like really loose, ornate look to it. And so a really good example of the Art Nouveau style is the Czech painter Alphonse Mucha. Have you ever seen his work before?
Yeah, I've seen his work.
Yeah, they're very pretty girls surrounded by flowers, that kind of thing.
Yes, very Gibson girl. It actually reminds me, well, a couple of things like runes and Celtic knots, those sorts of patterns.
The word for that actually is insular design. The word insula in Latin means island. Though it's called insular because it becomes so like intricate that there are islands within the design, basically.
That's really cool. Yeah, so it has that quality to it. It also really puts me in mind of, I feel like the style of tramp stamps that's become popular in recent years.
Like tribal designs.
Not exactly tribal, but like if you know Grimes's back piece, where it looks like some sort of alien language or something, it's sort of like, I've heard it described as cyber sigils before.
Oh, I've heard that term before actually too. I'm not from the tattoo world though. I don't have tattoos. Yeah, but I have heard that term before.
I only have one shitty like stick and poke.
What's it of?
It's a little moon. Oh. Yeah, it's half lasered off. But yeah, I love the look of them. And I feel like that's a design that I also see sort of in memes or something. But it's interesting how that same kind of flowing insular pattern feels so futuristic in those uses, but its use in Art Nouveau, it feels very much harkening back to the Middle Ages to me.
Yeah, I can see that too. Yeah, there's something about it that it's this really delicate balance between the natural and artificial. But Alphonse Mucha, which I'm pretty sure I'm saying his name wrong. I've heard the right way to say it. It's not that way. But he has a series of 20 paintings that I wouldn't say are Art Nouveau, but they're really interesting. I just want to bring them up because they're cool. They're called the Slav Epic. But he painted these 20 paintings over 18 years, and they're like floor-to-ceiling paintings. And there's like a gallery in Europe where they have like a whole room where it's just like each painting is like telling the story of like Slavic people. And it starts out from like this like really sort of like fantastical past, and then he paints a picture of like the future of Slavic people.
What's the future of Slavic people?
It's just a bunch of things going on. People are holding branches, I think. Some guy has his arms extended. But I really like them. And one thing I'll say is there isn't a lot of Art Nouveau architecture in Chicago. The only place I can think of it is there's an entrance for the Metro Electric and South Shore Line's Van Buren station. And it's in the same style as Hector Grimard's Art Nouveau Paris Metro stations. Like, I actually saw these because I actually went to Paris for 2 days. I went to Pigalle. I think that's the neighborhood where like Moulin Rouge is. I was staying there for a night. But I went down to the metro and I saw the entrance and it was the exact same as Chicago. So France had gifted us this like subway entrance.
Oh.
And we don't use it for a subway. We use it for a metro, which is like regional rail. But it's the only place in the city I can think of there being anything Art Nouveau. And it's actually on Preservation Chicago's watch list because there's been a proposal to redo the entrance of that station and they're just going to get rid of it. I'm pretty sure they won't like destroy it. They'll probably like put it in storage in some museum somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. I'm kind of like 50-50 with if I want them to keep it or not because it's more intricate and more interesting than what they're going to replace it with. But also, American cities have been designed to death based off of how Paris looks. Like our boulevards, like we have wide streets because of what they did. You know, they invented boulevards. And I don't know. I think we should be visually distinct, but I can also fully appreciate if people want the entrance to stay the same.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like that being a rarity in Chicago seems like it would make it more. Yeah.
So the next style we're going to talk about is Art Deco. So Art Deco flourished in the 1920s and 1930s, and it's distinguished by its sleek, geometric shapes, vibrant colors, and luxurious materials. Most people are familiar with the style thanks to popular Art Deco skyscrapers like the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and the Eastern Columbia Building. Art Deco reflected the optimism and technical advancements of the interwar period, as discussed on our interwar modernism episode, but it is like just as intricate as its predecessor, Art Nouveau, but in a different way. So whereas Art Nouveau is very like flowy and organic, Art Deco is very rigid and isometric. And I think this is definitely more dominant as an architectural style, but there are plenty of consumer goods that were still produced in the Art Deco style. I think particularly like with new technologies that were coming out at the time, like radios. I found a really cool toaster. I'll put that on the Pinterest board.
Nice.
But yeah, I think it does work better for skyscrapers, but it's also still like a very recognizable style for antiques that I do appreciate.
I really love the contrast with previous eras, you know, directly preceding it. It feels so modern all of a sudden. I think it really shows the psychic impact of the First World War. Everyone was just like, we're doing something completely different now. We're looking ahead.
I mean, that's the cool thing about interwar modernism was, you know, streamline modern, Art Deco. Those were some of the first styles where you can go back and they feel futuristic.
Yes.
There's something really special about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And then something about like Art Deco antiques is I really don't associate Art Deco with wood, but there are a lot of Art Deco antiques that are made out of wood instead of terracotta and glass like the skyscrapers. And they're oftentimes with like wood stains that are like medium or light. They're the shades of wood that I really, really hate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are some pictures of that on our Pinterest board, but I'm not a big fan.
Yeah, I think that I've only really come into contact with Art Deco in terms of architecture and illustrations that people are using as prints in their homes. I guess also jewelry. A lot of beautiful Art Deco jewelry, but
like
yeah.
You have friends that wear Art Deco jewelry?
No, but it's something that I've seen, you know, in a shop or something. Yeah.
Yeah. I can't actually picture that when it comes to mind, but I bet it's really pretty.
Yeah. I'm just thinking of like kind of like staggered earrings, you know, that are.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's like one way for like jewelers to like really upsell their jewelry is if you can like stack it.
True.
Yeah, like stacking rings. Mm-hmm. They love that sort of thing. And then the last antique style I want to talk about is mid-century modern. So pretty much everyone is going to know what this is. I'll still introduce it. So mid-century modern design was popular from the 1940s to 1960s and is characterized by clean lines, open spaces, and a mix of traditional and new materials. And so I think that like this style, it's good. I actually fell for the trap of it. You're sitting on a mid-century modern couch right now. I actually don't like it. There's no backing really. Like you have to like lean back in order to like really like be able to relax. But yeah, I bought it during the period of the pandemic where you couldn't really go into stores and I bought it online and I do regret it. But I'll probably only buy like a new couch when I move out of this apartment, which I'm not trying to do anytime soon.
It's a comfortable couch for what it's worth. in my estimation.
Yeah. I mean, now I know that. I mean, by the end of my like antiques frenzy, I realized like what my tastes were in a way that like I wasn't at the time that I bought the couch. So I'm okay with it for now, but
Mhm.
I'll get something a lot better one day.
A couch is difficult. It's such a big piece of furniture.
Yeah. Do you remember when like West Elm Caleb was a thing?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I
A lot of critiques for him were of him were like, I don't. Someone had said that didn't have a problem with what he was doing. Their problem was that he was designing MCM furniture. Yeah, because I think there is something like really easy to it in a way. It is popular in this way that I think it's sort of like with Impressionism, you know, the painting style.
Mhm.
It's like right in between traditional and experimental in this way that's like very palatable. And it's
Mhm.
sort of like this mixture that can't be replicated. Like it's found the point where once you go past the limit, a lot of people don't like it. And I think that's why it's so popular.
Yeah, that tracks. I'm not mad at it if some style of furniture has to be, the default for this time. I'm very okay with it being mid-century modern.
Yeah. I do like it too, honestly. But again, I think my aesthetic taste run a bit older than this. Mission style, again, is my favorite for sure.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I lean probably like arts and crafts the most out of this as well. But I think that a lot of the furniture that came after the mid-century modern of the 60s tended to be very bloated in its shape and oversized. So I'm happy to see sleeker designs come back into fashion and hang on for quite a long while at this point.
Yeah. And on the topic of style, you brought up a lot of old objects kind of allow people to anchor or access feelings of continuity with the past. And you also brought up like cores, or the idea of cores, like coastal grandma, old money, things like that. So yeah, the TikTok aesthetics.
Yeah, I'm maybe a bit too old and not on TikTok to talk about any of this, but I do feel like the existence of those cores as well as like cottage core points towards this very common affinity for objects of the past and for a higher standard of craftsmanship than modern consumer goods or contemporary consumer goods provide.
Yeah. I just appreciate coastal grandma, old money, cottagecore, things like that, in the sense that they do incorporate furniture to a degree, because the majority of internet aesthetics are just about the idea of the look. It's an outfit that you put on and you take off. There's nothing alternative about your lifestyle in the same way that was true for subcultures pre-internet. You know, like
Mhm.
prior to the internet, subcultures would have alternative ways of life. They would live in communes. They would have like alternative modes of transportation, whether it be skateboarding or motorcycles. Like there are aspects of people's lives that were different besides just your clothing.
Mm.
And for it to even just be also furniture, also just another consumer category that you can fit within your aesthetic, that's a little bit more creative. And I appreciate that.
Agreed.
Yeah. So now I want to get into a section on antique storage, maintenance, and then repair slash restoration. So this will be mostly me talking, I guess, but you can chime in whenever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll try to.
Yeah. So this is based off of my own research on like how to take care of my antiques. I've taught
Mhm.
classes at the library on antiques and restoration. So
Uh,
this is something I'm very knowledgeable about. So with storage, if you're not actively using antiques, it's best to cover them with a sheet and place them far away from windows. They need to be in a climate controlled room. So antiques prefer the same temperatures that humans prefer. You know, the range that you'd be comfortable in, they're also best suited to be in. So if it's freezing or really hot, you shouldn't leave antiques in those rooms.
mm.
And then for antiques that you are actively using, you kind of want to do something similar, but to a less extreme degree. You want to get the antiques away from windows, but instead of putting a sheet on them, you just want to cover the surfaces. So depending on what it is, like a table needs a tablecloth, you know. For my sideboard, I just put cloth across the top of it. I don't even use it to really put anything on it, but it's just good to prevent scratches.
Mhm.
So you just want to do things like that that will keep them safe. And then in terms of maintenance, so what you want to do is you need to dust wipe down antiques with soap and water, and wax them. This is pretty much as far as you need to go. You only want to think about refinishing in the most extreme cases, basically almost never, because the original finish for an antique is worth a lot because it took 100 years for it to accrue the grime and the texture that it now has. Once that's removed, you can't get it back for another 100 years. You only refinish them if the finish is like missing in areas. That's when it's really important. Otherwise, just dust your antiques as needed. You only need to clean them if you got like a new antique and it's dirty. And then with wood, you do want to like wax it once or twice a year. I do once. I don't want to overdo it because if you're overwaxing your furniture, it just has this like greasiness to it that like doesn't go away. So you want to avoid that.
I've heard that there's a specific type of wax that you're supposed to use or some that you should avoid.
Yeah, I use like what's called Howard's Feed and Wax. I believe I get it from Home Depot. Yeah, there probably are like more natural beeswaxes I could use. I would suspect that, but the one I use, I got it recommended to me through like antiques dealer videos. Like I trust those people. I'm not like going to third party like sources for this info. I did a ton of research back when I was going through my antique space.
I believe you. I just am getting flashbacks to my grandma using Pledge on everything.
Oh, you're not supposed to do that. Anything scented, you don't need it.
Yeah.
Just use water with a bit of soap. And then another fun tip actually with antiques, it's actually better to use like cut up old t-shirts that you've worn a lot. I actually have like wax furniture with like brand new rags that I bought from Home Depot, and they leave behind like microfibers. They get in the way of it becoming like nice and clean and shiny. So just like using old t-shirts is actually better.
Definitely.
Yeah. And then for repair and restoration, so again, I'm going to say this strongly. Don't refinish your stuff. Don't be an Instagram person who like paints your furniture white. If you want furniture that's white, buy new furniture. Don't buy old antiques that are cheaper and then paint them just to match your bedroom. Because there's only going to be so many antiques out there for so long, you know? If we're not good stewards of them, the quantity that are out there, they're going to decrease. So please don't repaint anything. Refinish only if absolutely necessary. And what I recommend in place of refinishing is something called Restore Finish. I'm going to put a link in the show notes to someone using this. It's actually pretty miraculous. So Restore Finish is this very thin lacquer that when you put it on the surface of antiques and you rub it in, it only penetrates the places where the surface has been scratched or it's like diminished. And so it will create a very even coat. And Restore Finish comes in a bunch of different colors. You just want to match the one that's closest to what you're going to add it onto. And this is what I recommend to everyone. It's used in the antiques industry all the time. It is considered by them to be an extreme change, but it's totally acceptable. This is not going to reduce the value of your antiques. It's going to like generally add value. Unless you have something that's like extremely old, extremely valuable, then you really just don't want to do anything to your antique. But in most cases, this will increase the value a little bit. Yeah. So that's the whole section on storage, maintenance, and then repair and restoration. Do you have any questions?
I have been interested in trying my hand at reupholstering things. Do you think that that's a worthwhile thing to pursue, or do you think that I'd be ruining pieces that could otherwise be restored in a similar way too?
I wouldn't do that as much because I think that reupholstery along with rewiring, those are pretty affordable. Like, especially compared to wood restoration, and then anything metal, like anything plastic. There are way more like people that can repair wooden furniture than can repair like metal or plastic or other materials that are a bit more obscure. But yeah, reupholstery isn't that bad. There are a ton of shops throughout the city. I would recommend like looking into them instead of doing it yourself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll
sometimes
Google
when people
around.
reupholster things, depending on how old your chair is, sometimes they'll find things inside of the chair because it was made by hand to a degree, but they'll find like things like old blankets and scraps of fabric.
Not super related, but well, no, I guess it is. I remember having a couch that was in my childhood home growing up. It got a tear in it and it was packed full of horsehair. So
Wow.
yeah.
Was anyone in the family like, oh, that couch felt weird? I kind of suspected that.
No, I think there was just something that was picked up, at a garage sale or something along the way. But that was just the stuffing material throughout. It was a pretty rigid couch, and I don't know how much of that has to do with the material or, the underlying springs, but
yeah, that's the interesting thing about antiques is that things were so interesting before we had these like complex supply chains where it takes 1,000 inputs to create like one consumer good.
mm-hmm.
Like back before when it would be like, okay, I need to just stuff this couch full of something. What do I have around me? And it's like, oh, I'll just get that horsehair.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that was I think it was a pretty standard packing material for a long time. Yeah. But I mean, readily available, I, in a similar vein, like newspaper being used for home insulation and such. Yeah. You really work with what you have outside of, these modern supply chains.
Yeah. I saw some pics on the internet recently where someone was like redoing the walls in a home. And they found, Joseph will hate me for this because he'd be like perfect and be able to say what this is called. But, when you take down the walls, there's like the wood bars, beams.
Yeah.
But someone had used like sticks and branches.
Oh, that's so cool.
They didn't even use like wooden planks.
Do you know if that was in America or?
Yeah, it was in America.
Okay.
I think the house was built around the Great Depression or something.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Really makes me think of like wattle and daub. Although that's kind of more of a
traditional building method.
Yeah, but there's a through line there too. Yeah.
Yeah. So next I want to talk about Antiques Roadshow. You said you watched this a lot when you're growing up, right?
Yes, I did.
Why do you think your parents were into it?
So I think my dad is a little bit one of those people who hoards metal signs and such in his barn. So that was definitely part of it.
Is there a type of metal sign he was really into?
I think he really likes Coke products. So many people do.
I feel like he could probably sell that. Like he probably makes a profit off of it, or he could if he wanted to.
Yeah, a lot of it's in pretty bad condition. Like I think that he's also prone to tinkering. So I think he's ruined the value on some of these objects by trying to like repair them. Yeah. So
rust is a big problem though. I mean, I read a whole book on rust this year, and the amount it costs like consumers each year is like crazy, honestly. Like, and I read that book in part because I'm a metal worker to a degree. I've tended to work more in like precious metals, like brass, copper, things like that. And I have always had questions for people who work in metal, like, how are you working with this? And it's like, it's not rusting. Because like when I purchase steel and I'm like, okay, maybe I'll use this sheet, it'll already have rust on it when I buy it. And it's just so confusing for someone who works in light metals / precious metals. Like, and it's because like, I mean, they're used to it, but like, I still have questions. Like one of the things they do is they put oil on it. They also paint it. They'll sandblast it, powder coat it. But like, it's still just like such a quandary for me. If I were to have a sign, like one of your dad's, and I was tasked with trying to prevent it from rusting further, I would be like, like, I really wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah, he doesn't either. These things are just withering away in our garage. But
I mean, it would probably help if he like stored them in a room that was like less humid. That would help.
It would. Yeah, but otherwise, I think my family just loved PBS in general. They have quality programming, and both of my parents are kind of history buffs to a certain extent. So that was an appeal as well, I think. Yeah.
My family watched Antiques Roadshow when I was growing up too. And I feel like just my understanding of the world, my worldview is a little bit older because my parents, they had me at 40. I grew up in a house with my grandma, and we would watch things together like The Wizard of Oz and Singing in the Rain, Shirley Temple, things like that. Which to me, I mean, I actually don't know if a lot of kids grow up watching Wizard of Oz, but I remember one time talking about it with like a friend in grade school, and I was like, yeah, have you seen it? And he's like, what are you talking about? Like he'd never really even heard of the movie. I mean, did you watch Wizard of Oz growing up?
I did, yeah. Though I also had parents who were older than my peers' parents. So mine were like 34 and 36 when they had me, and I'm an only child. But yeah, I definitely relate on feeling like a lot of my kind of cultural references and touch points are skewed a bit older, or I sort of, had this the aesthetics of like uh
Prior generations.
yeah, sorry, stumbling over my words. When I was like 8, I was reading like Time, like there was just the things that were lying around and available to me were all
older media.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, when I was a kid, I think one of the biggest like hallmarks of me kind of growing up with the mindset of a different era is that I still call it this. I call like tinfoil, or aluminum foil, tinfoil.
Is that not just a regional thing?
Is it a regional thing?
I've always assumed it was.
I've heard people be like, I feel like when I say it to people, I sound like I'm like a time traveler from 100 years ago, because I don't think anyone ever says it. But yeah.
I guess I'm not talking about it all that much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't say pop when I say soda more. But I grew up actually saying pop. It's a regional word for soda in Chicago that I've fallen out of use of using, which is unfortunate.
That is.
Yeah.
Got to keep the dialects alive.
But yeah, on Antiques Roadshow, something that comes out to me as someone who like rewatched it a few years ago during my Antiques Frenzy is like, there's like a limit to how much you can make off antiques that's like lower than you kind of think, It doesn't go up that high in pretty much every case. Like you're really lucky if it goes up past 1,000. And then if it goes up past 1,000, it's like, it rarely ever breaks 50,000. It's like, yeah. So like the antiques that you have in your home, they're probably not worth that much, which is unfortunate if you already own them, but it's a good thing if you want to buy more. Because like the prices are really not that bad.
No, they really aren't. And I think that this is kind of adds a sad element to like the American pickers shows and such, that these people will really think that they have, something that's going to aid in their retirement or something. And then you are lucky if it's pulling in, $300.
Yeah. And now
and
we live in a
all
sad
these
world
years.
where like people's Pokemon card collections cost more than their grandmother's like heirlooms. But yeah, I think I want to go back to the regional idea for a second. So
sure.
I love looking at Google Trends. For most episodes, I end up looking at like the terms related to the episode topic on Google Trends at least a little bit. And so with the term antique, it's most popular in states like Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island, which interestingly are some of the oldest states in the country. And then the states that Google antiques the least are Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and Florida. And so like the newer Sunbelt states are less interested in them. And then another thing that you can see from Google Trends is that antiques were most popular when Google first started tracking search results in 2004. It's been like a downward decline ever since. And actually, when I was getting like my table appraised to try to get it restored, I was told that like antiques become popular in 30-year cycles. This guy was like really old. It seemed like he knew what he was talking about. And so we might be at the trough, because I think that like the people who are most interested in buying antiques are finally coming to the age where they need to buy furniture. We'll see though, because the thing is, it's like things are so cheap now. It's like the previous benefit you might get from buying something secondhand and antique of it being a little bit cheaper probably isn't the case now. So
yeah. I do think that there's a flip side to everything, right? So with antique furniture maybe becoming more costly as it rises in popularity, it becomes more of a status marker too. So yeah, I think they'll endure.
Yeah, I meant to write about this, but I think that antiques are an example of something where it's really popular with people of. Actually, I'm taking this from like a video I once saw where there's this guy who is like talking about things that are popular amongst people who are rich and poor. And he was like, he said sidewalks. That was an example he gave. But another thing he gave was just like old furniture.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so happy you brought this up because, this is really like a main angle that I'm kind of coming at this with because I really have always had this association of antiques and heirlooms are, something for moneyed people. And it kind of is just like a physical manifestation of being settled and stable. Yeah. And the heaviness of so much of it really contributes to that, I think. Yeah. So then the flip side of instead of going to antiques dealers or auctions or estate sales, even if you're poor, that's more coming to you through your objects are coming to you more through thrift stores and garage sales and flea markets.
Yeah.
But there's a really fun sort of like pauper and prince element to it, I think, where like the same piece of furniture could end up at either spot. It just really depends on who gets a hold of it and also the quality of it, to which it's maintained throughout its life.
Yeah. I think that's interesting too. I do think that I heard something recently where I was talking to someone. We were discussing, again, probably last week I'll talk about this, but the Revolt of the Elites. I had the book discussion for it finally. But in the book, Lasha talked about how in order to be an elite in the context of when he was writing, you had to sort of be rootless and be willing to migrate in order to achieve things in life. And the person I was talking to said that he felt like the opposite was now true, where basically only the wealthy can afford to be rooted. Like everyone else keeps getting systematically pushed out and shuffled around the country. Like the people who are the most vulnerable, the least wealthy, they're the ones who have to like immigrate to exurbs in the Sunbelt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally agreed.
That was interesting to hear.
Just on the point about the Sunbelt, just to jog back to that, the states that are not searching for antiques as much, these also seem like states that would be the most difficult to maintain the quality of wooden furniture in. Just the dryness of the desert states and then the overwhelming humidity of Florida. Those both seem like they would be not great for wood.
Or metal.
I'm wrong. Yeah.
I could see that too. I don't think they're probably thinking about it that much. It's also probably just like, Victorian antiques. Do they match in your brand new home? Like, no. Probably not.
Yeah, that is true. You do see a lot of like new furniture that's made to look rustic, I think, in the Southwest. So maybe that's, scratching that same itch.
Yeah. And then I wanted to wrap up with this idea of stewardship. But first, I actually want to talk about gay cross-generational stewardship in antiques. So I actually visited a friend in St. Louis. He's this like older man. He's like 50. We're going to try to have him on the pod eventually. He's like this like micro internet celebrity who has 13,000 followers and posts about architecture all the time. But I went there with two of my other friends. We took Amtrak over to see him. It was my first time actually seeing where he lived. And I was just like blown away by his house because he had like such a large collection of antiques and just really valued them. Like he had like a mini portrait gallery from his front door into the kitchen of like 10 paintings on a wall. And he also had like, these 19th century candelabras from a French church. And he had this like really ornate chair covered in Egyptian motifs. And it just made me realize that like, I don't know, as a gay man, I don't really think as much about, I don't think about a lot of the things that other people do. Like it's a different experience, but I don't really think about too much about like, oh, what do I have to look forward later in life as a gay man? But I feel like so many of them just have like such good taste. And I just realized seeing his house that like, it's not done for me. It's like for some people, they peak as a youth, like their taste gets sort of fried or stuck. But for like gay men, they're just such good like patrons of the arts. They go to Broadway shows, they buy art from art galleries, they buy antiques. And it just made me feel really good about gay people for once. Because honestly, I don't really like people of my own age, and gay guys are kind of the same. But I've always felt that when I look at like young people or older people, I just feel like such a warmth for humanity. And just my interaction with him just made me feel like really good.
So that extends to younger people as well. It's not just more of an affinity for older people. It's anyone who's not in your specific age bracket.
Yeah. I don't know.
How big is that age bracket?
I mean, I feel like, well, it changes as I age, but yeah, I guess right now it'd probably be like, anyone from like 20 to 30, I view a bit more suspiciously right now. I mean, our last episode was on, or no, second most recent episode was on millennial nihilism, where we kind of like went in hard on our peers, basically. So, I mean, do you feel like just with older people, they put an effort to like pass down things to future generations?
Yeah, I mean, one of my grandmas will sometimes force costume jewelry and dishes that aren't necessarily my style on me when I'm at her house, and I take them out of love for her, and in the form of like ephemeral things like advice. But in terms of physical objects, no, but maybe I'm just not hanging around that many older people or the right older people.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like across our entire society right now, there's deferred maintenance, including with antiques. I just don't think people get that much pleasure out of work, in part because jobs just suck so much now. But I think you kind of need to enjoy the little things in life that are work in order to really enjoy life, including things like, waxing your antiques once a year. I think that people should take better care of like what they have. But thankfully the thing is like, I don't think the market for antiques is big right now. I kind of don't know if it's going to rebound based off Google Trends and what the antiques dealer advised me. We could be at a low point and it's about to just go up from here. But I'm a little bit suspicious. I don't think so.
I mean, another element in this waning of stewardship, I think, is women not being able to to maintain a domestic sphere in the same way that they did before two-income households were the standard. So it does have to be a labor of love now to take care of antiques in a proper way, whereas pre-women working outside the home as often, it was pretty standard for women to be doing these sort of maintenance activities.
Repolishing silverware.
Yes.
Yeah.
But who has time to polish silverware when you have to work 40 hours a week?
The podcast Nymphet Alumni, they have an episode where they talk about how they think that like the primary household responsibility of wives or mothers now is shopping. Like they can dedicate 40 hours a week to that, basically. And I think
and scheduling, but...
And scheduling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Digression.
But yeah, I think that like, yeah, we don't live in a world where like this sort of idea of stewardship, passing things down generation to generation matters to anyone. And I think, yeah, there's gay guys out there. Like, I feel like every time I go into an antique shop, like it's usually like stuff are owned by gay people. It's like pretty much the only intergenerational link in gay culture, I feel like, is like these beautiful antiques that keep getting passed down from like gay men to gay men.
I do feel like I see a lot of gay couples on their homes on estate sales.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that tracks.
Well, part of it is they often don't have descendants, which is sad.
True. Yeah, which I guess is why you have to look outside of your relatives for someone to pass these things down to, or like including values of stewardship. The only other group I can think where that really applies for is hobbyists. Like I have a friend who collects and repairs typewriters, and the men that got him into that and that, he mostly knows in that scene are all like in their 50s, the 70s, and want somebody that can pick up this craft,
Yeah.
in their absence.
Yeah. I mean, if anyone's in Chicago and you want to look at the old home of a gay guy who had really good taste, like what I'm talking about, There's this collection that's owned by the School Air Institute of Chicago, the Roger Brown Study Collection. Roger Brown was a Chicago Imagist artist, I believe, and he died during the AIDS crisis. But everything he owned in the house was preserved the day he died, including like boxes of like cereal and stuff like that. They kept everything. And yeah, he has work from artists like Henry Darger in his house. Like, it's a really cool place. But I recommend that to anyone who's like, what is Nathan talking about? Look at his house. Like, that's a good example.
I'll check it out.
Yeah. But yeah, this was a good episode. Thank you for coming on, Kamara.
Thank you for having me.
I just hope our listeners walk away with just like a little bit more of an inclination towards stewardship, because I don't think, again, it's a very valued skill in our society.
And they're really not making them like they used to anymore. So you got to maintain what's here.
I know, it's wild. I was actually just watching a video where there was a buyer, like a clothing buyer, who was comparing new Abercrombie & Fitch to old Abercrombie & Fitch from like 2005. Mm-hmm. And there was a drastic decrease in quality from 2005.
Just even like stitching being straight, you know, putting aside the materials that are being used, the actual crafting together of things is going downhill. So vintage is where it's at.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for listening to this very trad episode, and I hope everyone has a good one. Bye, everyone.
Bye.